I will point you may know this, there's a Mishnah in the end of Svachim that basically lays out where the Aron and the Mishkan were until the building of the Beit HaMikdash. Second, I can show that to you.
Yeah, I learned it just recently.
Oh yeah, is that in the Mishnah Yomit or something? Or do you do?
No, I thought it was Pesach. Yeah, I said Mishnah Yomi. Yeah.
Yeah, is that it? Yeah, so it's at the end there. It's very interesting. I mean, look, you can glean it all from the psukim, but it lays it out there in a pretty succinct manner. Just a second. Oh, here's Paul. Good. Hello, Paul.
Hi, hello.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
How are you doing?
So.
So. We're all suffering. No, I mean, we should all be well. Yeah, this was a side issue. Maybe we'll just start from here. This was a side issue that came up in the previous year, and Michael said that he just saw this also, but I'll just show you. Recently, wait a second. In the 14th chapter of Zvachim, it's the last chapter of Zvachim, it gives us the following Mishnayot. Ad shelo hukam hamishkan, hayu habamot mutarot, ve'avoda bibchorot. So until the Mishkan was built, then bamot were permitted, right? So bamot are like mizbachot that are not the mizbeach, right? They were places that people would set up to bring sacrifices, and it's the term that's used for a platform for sacrifices that's not in the Mishkan or not in the Beit HaMikdash. Those are called bamot. So before the Mishkan was built, bamot were permitted. In other words, people who wanted to bring sacrifices could build a bama and bring a sacrifice on a bama. V'avodah bivchorot, and the service, whatever service was being done before the Mishkan, was done by the bchorot. And after Mishukam Mishkan Nesra Bamot v'avodah b'kohanim. Once the Mishkan was built, then bamot became outlawed, right? They were asur, and the service was done by kohanim. And Kodshei Kodashim Nechalim Lifnin Min HaKlaim, Kodshim Kalim B'chol Machanei Yisrael. So we know from earlier in Zvachim and from the Torah that there's two kinds of korbanot and two levels of kedusha. So the ones that are kodshei kodshim, they would be eaten inside of the klaim. Right? So the klaim were the like curtains that were surrounding the area of the Mishkan. So that whole area was considered to be kosher for eating kodshei kodshim. And kodshim kalim, like shlamim, korban pesach, before things like that, that could be eaten anywhere in Machanei Yisrael. So, right. So, imagine that when we talk about Machanei Yisrael, right? This is apropos of Bamidbar, right? Because this is where we're going to have it laid out. That Machanei Yisrael has the Mishkan in the center, and that's surrounded by Machanei Leviyah, the Leviyim, 2,000 amot in all directions, and then you have the 12 tribes that are divided north, south, east, west into groups of 3 tribes each. So all of that constitutes Machane Yisrael, Shem Kolel, right? So the whole thing was called Machane Yisrael. And it had a Kedusha, which is going to be, later on, this Kedusha is going to be similar to Yerushalayim, or to Har Habayit, or to certain, right? So the chiluk of the Kedusha, we see this when we get to the Beit HaMikdash, we have Kodshei Kodshim, you can only eat in the Azara, in the northern part of the Azara, from the Mizbeach onwards. Exactly the boundaries of where that could be eaten is a machloket, but basically in the northern part of the Azara of the temple. And Kodshei Kodshim you could eat in any part of the Azara. And then certain korbanot you could eat anywhere in Yerushalayim, like Korban Pesach.
Excuse me.
Sure.
Mikdash, Mishkan. The Mishkan was built in the desert, yes.
Yes.
But there was there any Avodat Hashem Lifnei HaMishkan?
So yeah, apparently there
Because the Israel didn't know the Hashem. So what
right. So what exactly was the avodah? Hold on.
I know that they did do a avodah to the calf, but it's not what he means here, what they mean here.
No, but we have at least one example, and this is what the Bartanura brings. So when so Moshe goes up to Har Sinai, he gets the Torah, and then at the end of Parshat Mishpatim, it relates how he had come down, and there's like a kind of a celebration, and the pasuk there in the wait a second, I want to make sure you're seeing what I'm seeing. Hold on. The avodah was at the Bechorot. Dichtiv vayishlach et na'arei b'nei Yisrael. Elu ha-Bechorot she'avodah b'hem. Right, so the pasuk there. Second.
I never asked myself, so what avodah did this Bechorot do? I know they were replaced by the Levim after the Egel, but what avodah did they do? Because they didn't have the Torah, they didn't know what to do.
They didn't know what to do. But we had, okay, so I'll just say a couple of things about it. So one of them is, first let's just take a look for a second at let's look here. So first of all, remember, the idea of korbanot doesn't begin with Matan Torah, right? Because we have like Noach gave, even Cain veHevel, right? We have the idea of korbanot. So we know, and the Avot gave korbanot. In other words, we know that people gave korbanot.
I guess the Egyptians also did korbanot.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. In other words, but of course, the difference was that once the examples that I bring are people who are giving korbanot l'Hashem, right, as opposed to avodah zarah. But where would we have avodah per se? So here we have it in the story that at the end of Parshat Mishpatim, V'yal Moshe Amar Alei El Hashem Atavi Aaron Nadav Avihu V'shivim Mizignei Yisrael V'shtachavitem Meirachot. V'nigash Moshe Levado Hashem V'hem Lo Yigashu V'am Lo Ya'alu Imo. Exactly when this happens, this is a machloket rishonim if this is the chronology here, but for our purposes, it doesn't matter. ויבוא משה ויספר לעם את כל דברי השם ואת כל המשפטים. So Moshe, but clearly this is after Moshe had gone up to Har Sinai, and when we read just in a linear fashion, when we read the Torah, he gets Aserta Dibrot, he gets a couple of halachot about the Mizbeach, and then we have Parshat Mishpatim. It goes into Parshat Mishpatim, and this is after all the things we learn in Parshat Mishpatim. So it says that Moshe comes and he tells the people all of the words of Hashem and all of the Mishpatim. Right? So they all say, this is what we'll do. All right, so he writes all the words of Hashem down. He gets up early in the morning. So he built a Mizbeach at the foot of the mountain. Right, and 12 matzevot, right, 12 stands for each of the tribes. So then they bring olot and they bring zvachim and shlamim. So this is, of course, significantly before the Mishkan is built. So we see that, but this would seem to be avodah per se, right? This is some kind of an avodah, and vayishlach na'arei b'nei Yisrael. So who are the na'arei b'nei Yisrael? So according to Chazal, those were the b'chorot. So here we have an example of avodah that's done before the Mishkan, and it would have been done by the b'chorot. The next mission is Ba'ula Gilgal, Hutrua Bamot. When they came to Gilgal with the Mishkan, then the Bamot became permitted, right? So there was a Mishkan, but Bamot were permitted. People didn't have to come to the Mishkan to bring their Zvachim.
So besides the Mishkan.
Right. In other words, outside of the Mishkan, you could make a Bama. And you
somewhere else in Eretz Israel.
Yeah.
Wherever they are.
Wherever they are. Even though the Mishkan is in Gilgal, but wherever they are, they're allowed to bring sacrifices on the Bamot. And Kachei Kodashim Nechalim Lifnim Min HaKlayim, Kachei Kalim B'chol Makom. Right? So if you would bring Kachei Kodashim, so what would be Kachei Kodashim? That would be like Korban Chatat or Korban Asham. There's all of the things that. So those are the things that, in any event, those would be brought by the Kohanim as part of a regular avodah. So those Kodshei Kodshim, you had to eat, like in the Midbar, you had to eat them lifnim min haklayim. You had to eat them in the area of the Mishkan. But Kodshim Kalim b'chol makom, you could eat them anywhere you wanted. In other words, anywhere in Eretz Yisrael, you were allowed to eat Kodshei Kodshim. Then later, Ba'ul Shiloh, right? So eventually, we come to Shiloh, and in Shiloh, it wasn't exact. It was it was this. It was like a halfway house, right?
It was a mikdash. It wasn't anymore a stone bama.
So it was no longer just a mishkan, but it wasn't also a mikdash, right? Because it was the way Chazal understand it, based on the psukim, is that it had the building part of it was a regular building, was built of stone, but the roof was like the roof of the Mishkan. It had yeriyot for that's the way it's described in Shmuel, I believe, right? So it was, that's what I mean. So it was like an intermediary kind of structure. Ba'ula Shiloh Nesru Habamot. So it was now a more permanent type structure. So at that point, the Bamot become Asur. Lo Hayasham Tikra. right? It didn't have a roof. Ela bayit shel avanim milamatan, yiriot milamala, right? So they had the yiriot on top, and it was stone on the bottom, right? In other words, the building was stone. V'aytam menucha, and that was menucha. In other words, it's a reference to the pasuk that says "Kilo batem arat el hamenucha ve'el hanachala" in Sefer Dvarim, where it's talking about the idea that you can slaughter animals outside of the area of the mikdash because you haven't yet come to that area, to that time. So this is what the pasuk meant by menucha. It meant Shiloh, and what's the din? Kachei kadashim nechalim nifnim min haklaim. So they also had set up klaim around the mikdash in Shiloh, and so that's where you had to have kachei kachim. The kachim kalim maaser sheni b'chol haroeh. So you were no longer allowed to read kachei kalim anywhere. It had to be within eyesight, within the line of sight of Shiloh, of the mikdash. Then Ba'ul Nov Ulegivon, right? These were the next two stops for the Aron and for the Mikdash. Utru Habamot. At that time, the Bamot once again became permitted. Kachei Kachim Nechalim Nifnim Min Haklaim, Kachei Kalim B'chol Arei Yisrael. So Kachei Kachim, you had to eat.
מעניין מי מתיר ומי אוסר. There is no. It's a time at the time of the Shoftim, and the Shoftim there was no clear central ruling. So
well, so at each point, right? So presumably, though, it does come through the Shoftim and the Nevi'im of the time. I'm going to hold on 1 second. I'm going to leave that for the moment because I wanted to look at this sort of as a general, thing. So I'm not going to go into the details here. But Ba'ul Novo Givon, then the Bamot were permitted. Kachei Kachim were Lifnim Min Haklaim and Kachei Kalim B'chol Arei Yisrael. So now you had to eat Kachei Kalim outside of the area of the Mishkan, but it has to be in a city. You have to eat it in one of the cities because now cities are established and so forth. Then Baal Yerushalayim. So then once they came to Yerushalayim, right, in the Mikdash, presumably even before the Mikdash is built, but right, David brings the Aron to Yerushalayim. Nesru habamot, v'lo haya lehem od heter. Once Yerushalayim became essentially Ir HaBirah for this purpose, then you were no longer allowed to bring sacrifices on the Bamot. V'hi hayta nachala. And this is referenced in the Pasuk, Kilo batem arat el hamenucha ve'el hanachala. This is the Nachala. So this is the final stop. Kachei kachim nechalim lifnim min haklaim. Kachei kalim maaser sheni lifnim min hachoma. They had to be eaten within the wall of the city of Jerusalem. So, yeah. Anyway, that was a bit of a digression, but it had. I just know that I had referenced something about this last time, so I thought we'll take a quick look at that. Let's go now. Let's go back to the Gemara. So, all right. So we were talking about where do we know Rechitza? Where do we know that Rechitza is considered an inui? Right? Ibayit ema Rechitza dikrei inui minal. I don't know, where do I know that Rechitza is called an inui? So then we brought this whole story about Shlomo. After David dies, he tells Evyatar, he essentially gives him a warning, right? Because Evyatar was in with the camp of Adonijah, who was trying to take over and so forth. So he says, Evyatar, I'm not going to do anything to you because, even though really, you're chayav mita, right? Anatot lecha sadecha. Go back to Anatot, to your fields. Kish mavet tatam, because really you're chayav mita. But I'm not going to kill you today. Kinasata daron Hashem Elokim lifnei David avi, v'chi hitanita b'chol asher hitaneh avi. Right, since you suffered along with my father David, that is, you underwent inuyim, right? You had an inui, then I'm not going to kill you. And so what was the inui of David? So by David it says, Ki amru ha'am ra'ev ha'ayef etzameh b'midbar. Ra'ev milechem, etzameh mimayim, ayef mimai. So what is the ayef referred to? In other words, if it doesn't refer to eating and it doesn't refer to drinking, so what's left? La merechitza. Wouldn't I say that it means that they were ayef from the fact that they couldn't wash? By the way, another thought about that. So last week I mentioned, so the word ayef, it's interesting that Chazal see it as this kind of fluid word, right? That we always think, like in modern Hebrew, certainly we use ayef just to mean tired or weary. But I was thinking about, so in this context, so we have it in other contexts. I'm not going to go through all of the context, but it occurred to me that even in this context, Ra'ev ayef v'tzameh, so ayef is listed with two other physical sufferings. In other words, not just physical, because ayef is also physical, but in other words, it's Ra'ev and Sameh are sufferings where the body is lacking a specific thing. So that seems to then, in that context, then I can understand that ayef may also be something. It's not just a general term that they're tired. Because it's put in this list, it seems to be something more specific. So it would seem to specify something that the body needs. So what does the body need? So it's not bread and it's not water, because we get that from Ha'ev and Sameh. So what else could it be? So it could be that it needs to be washed, right? So that would be at least one way of understanding how this drasha works. But then the Gemara, right, was pushed back, the Dilma Minilata Sandal, right? So if you're saying it's because the body is lacking something, so maybe the body, like their bodies were lacking footwear, right? And maybe that's what they were suffering from. Elamara, Yitzchak Mehacha. So he says, okay, I'm going to learn it rather from here, from this pasuk in Mishnah that we looked at last time. Ma'im karim al nefesh ayefa. So it's like cold water on a nefesh ayefa. So Rabbi Yitzchak wants to say that implies that the body is refreshed when cold water comes onto the nefesh ayefa. So the Gemara pushes back on that. Maybe there it just means that the body is also the tired body or the weary body will benefit from drinking cold water. So Gemara pushes back. Miktiv ba nefesh ayefa. It doesn't say that. The pasuk doesn't say that it's cold water inside the person's body, which would mean that they drank it. Al nefesh ayefa ktiv. It's talking about water that comes onto somebody. So that's obviously rechitza. Okay, so now we're up to Nilata Sandal. We read this quickly last time, so let's go through a little more closely. Nilata Sandal Minava. Dichti v'David oleh b'maleh hazetim oleh u'bocheh v'rosh lo chafui v'hu olech yachef. Right, so I think we did look at this quickly last time. So this is when Shmuel is running away from Avshalom, right? So he's evacuating the city with his supporters, and he's in a very dire situation. And one of the things it says about him is that he's going Yachef. So Yachef Mimai. So what does it mean? You know, what is he Yachef from? Lav Menilata Sandal. Wouldn't you say that means that he's now barefoot? He doesn't have footwear. Vidilma me susya ume ratka, or according to the Tikkun of the Masorah of the Bach, is that it should be matarka. In any event, matarka, as Rashi explains, is shotasus. It means that maybe what it meant was that David was bereft, to pick another word, he was bereft of having his horse and riding crop. That's the word I think I was looking for last week. Right? He didn't have his horse and riding crop. In other words, as a king, that would be expected that the king would ride on a horse. And here David is going without a horse. So for David to say that David is Holech Yachef, it just means he's now been knocked down he's been knocked down a notch, so that he's no longer riding. And Yachef doesn't mean that literally doesn't have any shoes. It just means that now he has to walk with everybody else. In short, I can't bring a proof from this pasuk. It's not 100% clear that Yachef here means barefoot. It could just mean that it was something specific to David, that he couldn't ride a horse. Elamar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak mehacha. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, I'll learn it from a different pasuk. In this pasuk, it says, Ba'etahi Diber Hashem biyad Yeshayahu ben Amotz lemor. Hashem spoke to Yeshayahu, Lech ufitachta hasak me'al matnecha, ve'na'alcha tachlotz me'al raglecha, vayaz ken haloch arom v'yachef. So God spoke to Yeshayahu. He said, open up the sack that's on your loins and remove the shoe that's on your feet. And this is what he did. He went naked and barefoot, or naked and yachef, right? So here, it would seem to be, right, yachef mimai, lav minirata sandal. So here it seems to be clear, because Hashem tells him specifically, remove your shoes. And then he's described as being yachef. So this would seem to be a very clear proof that yachef means barefoot. So Gemara pushes back here also. It says ve'ema b'minali amatulaim. Maybe it just means that he had shabby shoes. He had shoes that were, falling apart. Why would we think that? If you don't say that, arom mamash. In other words, in the same pasuk where it says he did this, and then he went naked and yachef, he went arom. So what do you think, that Yeshayahu literally went naked? Like he removed the sack from his loins, and then what? And then it fell to the ground completely, and he went around naked. So just like we wouldn't assume that he was completely naked, but now he was dressed down somehow, right? He had less clothing on. It must mean that he had like tattered clothes. That's what it means. He wasn't literally naked, like fully buck naked. He had on tattered clothes. So then I'd say that's also true of the second part of the pasuk about Yachef. Just like Arom isn't the Gamre Arom, Yachef is not the Gamre Yachef. So once again, I can't prove from here that Yachef means Nilata Sandal. And the reason, just to keep us centered, just a second. All right, well, anyway, we'll come back to that in a second. El Amar Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak. So rather, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, I'm going to learn it from a different pasuk.
Shel,
Yeah.
I ask myself, didn't Chazal, or at this time, I don't know when this was written, weren't they really not sure about the language? That means, did they already forget some of the language because they spoke Aramaic and they didn't know exactly what the language was? Or are those, excuse me for the word, tricks because they want to they want to prove something in the halakha?
Okay, so actually, I'll offer you a third possibility. So first of all, let's take each part of what you said because it's interesting. Did they forget the language? So first of all, we do know from other parts of the Gemara that there were certain words that Chazal were no longer sure of or didn't know, right? There's a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah where it brings these stories about Rebbe's maidservant, right? Michael Schwartz, you know this, you learned this.
Yeah. They debate a word, and then she says, well, it means such and such. And there's a whole series of them. I don't remember the details, but I've learned this, yeah.
Right. So what she doesn't join in their discussion. It's just like there's a right. Like now we have the modern word matateh for a broom. It's based on a pasuk in Yeshayahu, but when the Chazal, like in the time of Rebbe, when they were learning that, they didn't really know what the word meant. And then one time when they came to see Rebbe, they walked in, and the maid yelled at them and says, how many times am I going to have to sweep up here? And she used the word the tateh. And then they understood that tateh means to sweep. Just because that was just part of her colloquial knowledge of the language. And yes, and there are other ones. That one always, but that's how they learned from her. It's not like she joined in the discussion. It's just like she was yelling at them for this or that. And toch kedei, they understood. Anyway, all that to say that, yeah, there in some cases, Chazal were genuinely not sure about the meaning of words. And it could be that that's true here also. It could be that this is part of what's going on here, that Chazal are picking on these psukim, and they're trying to bring psukim to show you from context to make proof positive. So what's the idea? Let's say the word ayef or the word yachef. It seems from the proofs that we have a general idea of what they mean. But now I want to bring specific examples to try to pinpoint the meaning. So I have some general idea of ayef, and I have some general idea of yachef, but it's not 100% clear. But it's also true. The last thing you said is also true, and we'll see if we have time. I'll show you. There's a comment in the Ritva where after the next part of the Gemara, which I think we'll be able to at least get through, that talks about where to learn Tashmish Amita, and we'll see it goes into a lot of detail there. At the end of this whole discussion, the Ritva says that really all of this is Lahagdil Torah v'Yadir, because in any event, we know all of these halachot are all durabanan anyway. In other words, the other inuyim are midurabanan, and so it's meaning Chazal didn't have to prove based on psukim that each of these things is called an inui. but they wanted to. They wanted to try to find it. And the Ritva is saying that was an exercise in Limud Torah. It's not that we're going to because we don't rely on psukim from Nach to give us halacha, but we do look to psukim from Nach to give us definitions of words. Right? The Gemara says that in Baba Kama. Divrei Torah mi divrei Kabbalah lo yafinan. We don't learn divrei Torah from divrei Kabbalah. Divrei Kabbalah is from Nevi'im. But we see that, but we do learn of words. So the truth is, yes, what we're doing now is a kind of an exercise in, it's a Torah exercise and it's a linguistic exercise. And to me, it's very interesting because it raises some interesting points about what our assumptions are of meanings of words in Tanakh. So in any event, we get to this point. We see that for the word yachef is still not 100% clear, because first I could say yachef just means that it was something particular to David, that it meant that he had to walk instead of ride. And then I say, well, what about Yeshayahu? Because he had to take off his shoes, and he's called yachef. But I say maybe it just meant that he had worn out shoes, just like he had worn out clothing. He had worn out shoes. So Elam Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak Mehacha says, I'll learn it from here. Mini raglech miyachef ugronech mitzimah mini atzmech minachetz kedei shelo yavo raglech lidei yichuf mini leshonech midvarim betelim kedei shelo yavo gronech lidei tzimah. Let's take a look at this. So this is Yirmiyahu. This is a parak that perhaps you're all familiar with. It's the second parak of Yirmiyahu. So the pasuk is later on, but just I didn't give you the whole context there with Yeshayahu. It's very interesting, but the immediate context there is not, I would say, is not as important. The main thing is to understand that Hashem told Yeshayahu to essentially put himself in a state of a kind of avelut by loosening his clothing and by not wearing shoes, or not wearing good shoes, whatever it is. Here, the context is a context that we know that from reading this, right? Yidvar Hashem Elai Leimor Haloch v'karata b'oznei Yerushalayim Leimor Kol Ma Hashem Zacharti la'chesed nurayich amat klulotach lechteich acharai b'midbar v'eretz lo zruah. So,
Shel, can you share the screen?
oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Okay. I thought that would have been automatic. Thank you. Right, so this is a haftarah that we're familiar with, right? That and Yirmiyahu goes on with all these metaphors about how Hashem took care of Bnei Israel, and now they've rejected him. And it goes back and forth, many instances of this, and we get up to the pasuk that the Gemara is quoting. It says, "Mini raglech miachef, ugronech mitzima, v'tomri noash lo ki ahavti zarim v'acharehem elech." So this is, as it were, Hashem is telling, or the Nevi'im are saying to Bnei Israel, hold yourself, mini raglech miachef, prevent your feet from yachef. Presumably meaning to keep your feet from being barefoot. Let's see how they translated it. Withhold your foot from being unshod. That's a word that we don't use very often, if ever.
What does it mean?
Well, shod is like from the word shoe, right? So if you are shod, it means you're wearing shoes. If you're unshod, it means you're not wearing shoes, right? But it's a kind of an archaic word. You don't use it too much. I use it in Scrabble. I think that's maybe the only. That's the only place we. All right, so here though, based on the way we learned the other psukim, here we have a better proof, because what does it say? Withhold your foot from being unshod, and your throat from thirst. So if I want to learn one part of the pasuk out of the other, like I did in the pasuk from Yeshayahu, because I wanted to say, look, from Yeshayahu, I don't know if Yachef really means barefoot because he wasn't totally naked, so I would say he wasn't totally barefoot. But here I'm going to lump together the idea of Yechefut of the foot with Tzima of the throat. Right, so keep your foot from being barefoot, from being without shoes, and your throat from being thirsty. Right, v'tomri noash. Right, but you said, they said, is it in vain? Like noash, like it's like yeush, right? Like it's something. It's like there's a word I'm trying to think of, but whatever. It's like it's a done deal. Lo, no, ki ahavti zarim v'achareha melech. So in the context of what Yirmiyahu is talking about, earlier in the chapter, right, famously Hashem says that you've done me two wrongs, and you've removed yourself from the core mayim chayim, right? You've removed yourself from the source of water, of the living water, which is the Torah, which is Hashem. And so now the Nevi'im are saying, so you don't have to go barefoot, and you don't have to be thirsty for water. So the thirst for water in this context is really the thirst for the Torah. It's the thirst for Hashem. And he's saying, you don't have to put yourself in that position. So right now they're completely thirsty for water. It means they're completely parched. And in the same way, their feet would then be completely unshod. Feet would be completely without footwear. In other words, the Nevi'im are saying, you don't have to make yourself suffer to remove yourselves so far from God. God is still willing, God still wants the relationship with you. But then you reply, like Bnei Yisrael, you reply, says, no, too late, like we can't do anything about it, because really we love these other gods better. But for the purposes of our discussion in the Gemara, this is a stronger proof, because here, as the Gemara says, Mini atzmech minachet. So what does it mean? Mini raglech minachet. Mini atzmech minachet. Keep yourself from sin, which is the metaphors for being like being barefoot, which is like being exposed in a bad way, right? Which is like sin. It weakens you, or it reduces you in a bad way. So that you're keep yourself from sin, in order that your foot should not come to be unshod. Prevent your tongue from vain words, so that your throat will not come to thirst. So from here, with Nachman Bar Yitzchak's proof. So this is what the Gemara ends up with. This is the proof that Yachef means not wearing shoes. It means not wearing shoes. Just a second. So now, but see, the thing that we didn't yet explain is what's the connection between Yachef and Inui? In other words, where's the pasuk that relates Yichuf with Inui? Like when we were doing the thing with Rechitza, we had to find a connection between Rechitza and Inui. And there we did it by starting off with the pasuk that says Kihitanita, that you, Evyatar, afflicted yourself along with David. And then we saw from another pasuk what was the affliction. So the affliction included, or at least we thought it included, the idea that they weren't washing. So where do I see that Yichuf is an affliction? Just a second. Let's see. So presumably, we get it. The Gemara doesn't go out of its way to explain this because it's relying on the earlier part of the sugya. Just a second. Keep going back and forth. Right. So what do I mean? So this, when the Gemara wanted to know again about Rechitza, we started by saying that Evyatar was nitaneh, right, with everything that David was nitaneh. And then I saw that what were the inuyim of David when he was running away from Avshalom, that the people that were with him Ra'ev Ayef Sameh. So the Gemara, when it comes to Nilata Sandal, it's relying on this first pasuk that talks about David. David oleba ma'aleh zeitim odel vochev rosh l'chafui uhu olech yachef. That was also in the same story with Evyatar, right? It was the same story of running away from Avshalom. And we know that David hitaneh in that story. So I don't need to say any more about that. All I need to do is to show that one of the inuyim that David suffered was yichuf. So once I introduce yichuf into this, then my only question is, what exactly is yichuf? What exactly does that mean? So I want to prove it from David himself. And then I say, okay, I can't prove it from David himself. So I'll try to prove it from Yeshayahu. I can't prove it from Yeshayahu. So I'll try to prove it from Yirmiyahu. I'll prove it from Yirmiyahu. And that's where it is. But all the way Yachef comes into the discussion starts with David. And it starts with David because we know that David suffered inuyim. That's the Mechaneh Meshutaf, right? That's what brings it all together. So again, it's kind of a thin thread, but nonetheless, that's how the Gemara seems to be working. Now we come to Tashmish Hamita. I think what we'll do, let's read this next part of the Gemara, and and we'll see how it goes. Maybe we'll finish it, and if it's not clear, then we'll pick up from here next time. For my own personal reasons, I want to try to finish in the next 10 or 15 minutes. So Tashmish Hamita Digre Inui Manala. Where do I know that Tashmish Hamita is called an Inui? Tichtiv Im Taned Benotai Im Tikach Nashim. Right? So what's the context of that pasuk? Im Taned Benotai.
When Yaakov is fleeing from Esau.
Right. And so who says that to him? Not from Esav, but from
Lavan. Yes,
Lavan.
Lavan. Yeah, Lavan says it to Yaakov, saying, "Don't hurt my daughters."
Right. Yeah, very good. In other words, right, the Gadol, after Lavan catches up to Yaakov, who's fleeing from him, and they make, they make a brit between themselves, right? And at Yegar Sahaduta, Gal Eid. By Yoma Lavan, Gal is Eid Beini Uvencha Hayom. So Lavan says, this pile of stones is going to be a witness between you and me today. Aken Karashmo Gal Eid. That's what Yaakov called it, Gal Eid. Bahamitzpah Sherama Yitzef Hashem Beini Uvenecha Ki Misater Ish Mere'ehu. And the outlook, the mitzpeh, was called because may Hashem keep watch between you and me when we will be hidden from each other. Okay. It goes on to say, Im ta'aneh benotai v'im tikach nashim al benotai, ein ish imanu, re'eh Elokim eid beini uvenecha. So this lashon of im is a lashon of shvuah. Right, he's making him swear that you will not ta'aneh benotai. Right. So what does it mean ta'aneh benotai? So right now we're not sure, but the Gemara wants to bring it as a proof of the idea of relating inui to Tashmish Hamita. So how would we understand the pasuk? Im ta'aneh benotai, if you would make them suffer by withholding conjugal relations with them. I think we mentioned this in another shir, that it seems like the way you could understand this is in the context of other Hebrew words, where the word means it means something and its opposite. And I gave the example of the sakel, which means to throw stones or to remove stones. There are other examples. Actually, at the time I made a list, but now I don't remember where I put the list, and I can't think of any other ones. But there are actually many examples of this in Hebrew, where something can mean itself and its opposite. And maybe this is also how. So, im ta'anet benotai means if you withhold conjugal relations from them. The im tikach nashim al benotai. And if you take other women, or it's other wives, besides my daughters, Eini Shimano, and there's no one with us. In other words, referring back to this idea of mitzpah in the previous pasuk, in other words, no one's going to see this. In other words, I won't necessarily know about it. So I'm going to make you swear. So God will be a witness between us, right? Because I won't know otherwise. So for our purposes, the Gemara wants to bring this as a proof that Inui is another term that can be used for tashmish hamita. Im ta'anet, so Gemara breaks it down as this. Im ta'anet benotai im tikach nashim, im ta'anet mitashmish. If you do inui to my daughters, that is, if you refrain from tashmish, im tikach mitzarot, and if you will take, that's talking about tsarot, right? Tsarot are wives, right? They're extra wives. If you have one wife, that's a wife. If you have two wives, then they're tsarot. So why, maybe Lavan means, maybe they're both talking, maybe both parts of the pasuk are talking about tsarot, and it's just a double language. In ta'aned benotai, in tikach nashim, in other words, that the second part of the pasuk, in tikach nashim, is explaining the first part of the pasuk, and I can understand it like this. Im ta'aned benotai means if you make, it just means if you make my daughters suffer. How will you make them suffer? If you take other wives, that's how you would make them suffer. So I'm making you swear not to take other wives. And in that case, then the inui here has nothing to do with tashmish. It's just a general term that is then explained by the second part of the pasuk. So the Gemara says, no, miktiv im tikach. Does it say im tikach nashim? Ve'im tikach ktiv. It says, and if you will take. So what's the significance of the and? Why should that make a difference?
It makes it separate. It's not explaining the first phrase.
Right. It's a separate clause. So it must be that it's distinct from the first clause. If it had said, im tanet benotai im tikach nashim, then I could understand. That's exactly what it means. That it means that taking other wives is an explanation of the inui. But since it says ve'im tikach nashim, I understand that I have im taneh, that's one thing. Ve'im tikach is another thing. So the Gemara is still not satisfied. So Ema idi ve'idi mitzarot. Maybe I'll say both the first part of the pasuk and the second part of the pasuk are both talking about taking other wives. So the first chad the tzarot didei, the chad the tzarot atyan le me'alma. So the first one im ta'aneh, that just means that if you take other wives that you already have, tzarot didei would be the tzarot that Yaakov already has. So who are the potential tzarot to Leah and Rachel? Who else does Yaakov have?
They're maidservants. They're handmaids.
Right. So he has the maidservants. So maybe what it means, we'll see. This is how Rashi understands it. Maybe it means that Lavan is making him swear that he will not elevate. He won't elevate the Amot Bilhan Zilpa. He won't elevate Bilhan Zilpa to the level of being full tzarot. And then the im tikach means not only that, but don't bring in other wives altogether. Maybe that's how I'll understand this pasuk. And then once again, the inui here will just be will be referring to making Rachel and Leah suffer, because then they have to deal with other wives. It doesn't have to do with tashmish hamita. So that's the question at hand. Dumya di'im tikach. So I'll say, no, the first part of the pasuk is still, I'm sorry, wait. Dumya di'im tikach. Mi kitiv im tikach v'im ta'aneh. Im ta'aneh v'im tikach ktiv. One second. I punctuated this incorrectly. The way you read this is Ema ida v'ida mitzarot. So let's say both clauses are talking about making Yaakov swear that he won't take tzarot. Chad tzarot didei. So the first clause is that he won't elevate the Bilha and Zilpa to a higher status to be tzarot. V'chad tzarot dat yadnei me'alma. And the second clause is going to be that he can't bring in other women to be wives and then to be tzarot. Dumya di'im tikach. So then it would be like, that means the first clause is like im tikach. The first clause of im ta'aneh is like im tikach. Miktiv im tikach v'im ta'aneh. But does it say im tikach v'im ta'aneh? In other words, is that the order that we're talking about? Does it rather im ta'aneh v'im tikach ktiv? The order is the other way. What difference does it make which order it is? So if you say, so if the order is Chad tzarot didei v'chad tzarot atyanei me'alma, so it means the first inui im ta'aneh. This is really in the weeds, but if you im ta'aneh means you're not allowed to elevate the tzarot, the concubines that you have now to be full wives. Okay, so that that's bad enough. And then it would say, and also you can't bring in tzarot da'alma. So the Gemara wants to argue that if that was true, the order should be different. It should start off with the more chamur. Let me explain what I mean. I'm gonna do this with Rashi to try to flesh it out. Im ta'aneh mitashmish lashbito notam. So this is going back to the beginning of the discussion. Im ta'aneh mitashmish lashbito notam. Right? If you make my daughters suffer from tashmish, meaning that you withhold their conjugal relations. Im tikach mitzarot hashbiyo kemashma'o shelo yosif lahen tzarot. So that means that I take that as pshat. That's just the plain pshat. He made him swear that he wouldn't take other wives. Rashi then gives his girsa, which is the girsa that we have in the Gemara, and I didn't check to see what other girsaot there are here. But Rashi then explains, Hachi perusha, ema idi v'idi mitzarot. Let's say both the first clause and the second clause are both talking about tzara. And this is how I understand it. If you make my daughters suffer to take other wives besides them, miktiv im ta'aneh im tikach. Does it say im ta'aneh im tikach? The havi im tikach perush, that im tikach becomes a perush for the first clause, because it's there isn't a vav that separates them. Di'im ta'aneh v'im tikachtiv, that does have the vav of v'im. Milta achriti, like Michael said, it's a different thing. It's a different clause. Okay, so that's the first part. Ema idi mitzarot, chad tzarot idei. Shelo yaseh Bilha v'Zilpa gvirot shavot lahen. Right, that he shouldn't elevate Bilha and Zilpa to be gvirot, right, like women of status, like Leah and Rachel. Bahadar Ashbei, and then that's the first part. That would be the im ta'aneh. And then he made another shvua, im tikach nashim. What would that mean? Dahainu tsarot atyan lehu levater hachamei alma. That would be other tsarot, other women that he would take on as wives from wherever, right? Not from his present clan. V'hachim istabra. Right, and this would make sense. Dumya devi'im tikach. So then, this makes sense. Meaning, as a parshanut issue, I understand. Im taner benotai, im tikach dashim. They're talking about the same general topic. Im taner means don't elevate Bilha v'Zilpa to be sarot, and im tikach, and don't take other women that we don't even know about yet. So, but it's all talking about bringing tzarot. So the Gemara says, "Mikti im tikach v'im taneh." Does it say im tikach v'im taneh? Why would I think that it would be im tikach v'im taneh? So Rashi explains, "Tzarot da'alma kashot lehen min harishona." The idea of bringing in other wives that they don't even know about yet, that would be even harder on Rachel and Leah than elevating Zilpa and Bilha, right? Because Zilpa and Bilha are already part of the family. There's a certain familiarity. So it would be hard for them, but, they could get over it. But if after he already has Rachel and Leah and Zilpa and Bilha, then he brings in even other women, that would be really hard. That would be like a real inui. So in that case, the first part of the shvuah that Lavan would make Yaakov take should have been to say, you can't take women from out of the, you can't take women ba'alma, right? You can't take any other women at all. So he should have started off from the worst thing. You should have said, you can't take any other women. And not only that, even the women that you have, like Bilha and Zilpa, you can't elevate them. It's not the way that people would phrase such a thing, to start from the light thing and then go to the heavier thing. He should have started like with the real heavy thing. He should have said, you can't take other women. Not only that, you can't even take the women that you already have. And that would make more sense. So based on that interesting twist of parshanut and a bit of psychology, then I say, okay, im tanavim tikachti. So I'll push that away. In other words, so what am I left with at this point? At this point, in other words, what was I trying to prove, and what have I proven?
That it's not tzarot. It's not referring to tzarot. It's referring to Shmish B'Tam.
So yeah. So in other words, after all of this, then I could say that pasuk of im ta'aneh is referring to Tashmish Shemitah, because the other things that the Gemara said it might mean, I've managed to give reasonable arguments about why it wouldn't mean those other things. And now we have the last part. Amarle Rav Papa Labai. So Rav Papa says to Labai, Hatashmish Gufa Ikre Yinui. In other words, why do you, to add my own spin on it, in other words, he's saying to Abai, look, You don't have to go through all these machinations. The word inui, it means tashmish. How do I know? Dichtiv, vayishkavotai vayana. He laid with her and inaota, right? So what's the context of that pasuk? Who laid with whom?
Oh, Dina is the Yaakov's daughter Dina.
Exactly. So this is Shem and Dinah. Let's see. Here, ותצא דינה בת לאה אשר ילדה יעקב ויראה בבנות הארץ, וירא אותה שכם בן חמור, אחיו נשיא הארץ, ויקח אותה, וישכב אותה ויענה. And here, I'd say the pshat is that the vayana is in fact like either a hemshech, a continuation, or a perush of vayishkav. He laid with her, vayana. He had sex with her. He had tashmish mita with her. Why didn't I just bring a proof from here? It's like a very straightforward proof. I don't have to do all these machinations that maybe vayana means this and maybe it means that. Here I see that inui, in this sense, refers directly to tashmish mita. So, Amar lei, so Abaye says to Rav Papa, Hatam she'ina midiyot acherot. He says it's not so simple. There, it's that she got inui from other biyot. So this is a little bit unclear what exactly Abaye means. So let's also look at Rashi. Rashi says midiyot acherot. He says something interesting. He says, "Shaitla mitavalo, v'lo ba'alea ba'onata b'yamim she'amda etzlo." That she, Dina, desired Shechem. The idea is that once Shechem shachavota, that aroused within her the desire to have relations, to have more, to do it again, to have more relations with Shem. So what's the inui? That he didn't satisfy her after that. In the same way that we understood the inui earlier with the banot, with Rachel and Leah, Bataner benotai. It's this idea vayana means that he shachavota, but then he didn't give her any more sex. That's one way of understanding it. And Rashi goes on to say,
I always understood. He knew that he violated her.
So it raises the question though, why do you need both vayishkav and vayana? What is it?
He forced himself on her.
So
that's what I understood always.
No, I understand. What I'm saying is that it's arguable though that the passage itself is not 100% clear. So midiyot acherot. Another way of understanding it, Rashi says like this: Vani shamati. He gives another. So in Rashi's first pshat, and this is his pshat. His pshat. Wait a second. Let's put this in context.
Sure. What is the word in the Tanakh to violate? How would you say it?
I could say anas.
I don't know. That's what the word we use today. But
but that's also Tanachi. It's also Tanachi. We have it in Dvarim. We have it in Dvarim. It's not Vayana is not necessarily right. Violate. It could be violate or to ravish. or things like that. But see, once again, I'll go back to what we said earlier in the shiur. It's not. I think part of the issue here is that these words, we know be'erech what they mean, or maybe we know maybe the problem is that we know more than one definition for these words. And what we're trying to do is pinpoint a definition. We want to say this means such and such absolutely. That's difficult to do, because I could push back and say, maybe it means this and maybe it means that. So you know what? I am going to stop here. I want to look at this a little bit further. Feel free to, look at this yourself. And you'll see they're actually different. There are different understandings. But I'll just leave you with the dilemma that we have when we're learning. So a moment ago, we seem to finish this idea that I can make a relationship between Inui and Tashmish Amita. I learned it from the pasuk with Lavan and Yaakov. And then I have Rav Papa says to Amaya, why didn't I learn it from Ishkavot Havayana? Why didn't I learn it from there? So, however I understand Abaye's answer, the answer seems to be, no, you can't learn it from there. So the question is, why can't you learn it from there? And what exactly does Abaye mean when he says, She'inami biot acherot? What does that mean? What are biot acherot? And what does it mean that, why is that inui? So this is what Rashi is trying to explain, and I'll show you some other perushim. But you can look and you can see what other, like Steinsaltz or the Art Scroll. I don't know what Art Scroll says, but you can see what they say. But this is the learning problem that we have. So what I understand, and this is not a real answer to you, Paul, but it's a partial answer. I understand from the fact that Abaye pushes back on Rav Papa that he's saying, I can't use the pasuk of Vayaneh as an absolute proof, because it could mean, instead of what you think it means, Rav Papa, it could mean something else. And this is the problem with all of these, right? This is the whole exercise that the Gemara is doing here. We're looking at very particular words. We're looking at Ayef and Yachef and Inui, right, in different forms. And we're trying to figure out exactly what they mean. So in terms of halacha, we know the halacha. This is not going to change how we understand the Inuyim on Yom Kippurim. But it is an exercise in learning, that we want to understand what are the different possible meanings of these words, and why might I relate them to these specific Inuyim that I have on Yom Kippurim. So I think we'll leave it at that, and we'll come back. If anybody wants, besides looking at that, the other source that I mentioned, if you want, you can look. They'll have it here on Al HaTorah. I don't know if they have it so far yet. You can look at the Ritva on the Gemara. It's the first Ritva on Ayin Zayin Amud Bet. It's interesting. Anyway, that's it. Have a good night. Chag Sameach.
Chag Sameach.
And Seder. Paul, אתה התאוששת לגמרי. You had... אתה לא רוצה
לא, זה ייקח הרבה זמן.
באמת? אוקיי. איך אתה מרגיש?
ייקח הרבה זמן.
אוי, מה אני אגיד לך? You should have a רפואה שלמה.
Amen.
תודה.
Bye-bye.
ביי.